Our next speaker is the Regional Vice President of Tanium, a cybersecurity and systems management company. With over 25 years in the IT and cybersecurity industry, he has worked with the largest enterprises, governments, and organizations of all sizes, including those with the most complex ecosystems and requirements. He focuses on driving the strategic security initiatives for organizations, helping them to achieve their business outcomes in the process. Our speaker is responsible with setting up Tanium's ASEAN operation, bringing its disruptive innovation to organizations here to deal with the evolving cyber landscape. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tanium Regional Vice President, Mr. Alvin Tan.
Good morning. Thanks for joining me in this session on the need for speed. My name is Alvin. I'm the Regional Vice President for Tanium. Now, first, let's start by looking at why there's a need for speed and the current state of cybersecurity. With the pandemic raging, we know that many workers have gone home to work. And since they've gone home to work, the endpoint has become the last line of defense. When we talk about endpoint security, we used to look at it and we say, hey, for known malwares and known file attacks, the antivirus should be able to block those kind of attacks. Over time, we know that some have leaked through, so we've added new solutions like anti-spyware and host IPS. Gartner even came along and said there are 9 ways to prevent the attack. And in those 9 ways, it includes things like the desktop firewall as well. Over time, the whole gamut of protection solution has become known as endpoint protection. And the market now offers this as a single console with multiple agents. And each of the agent could be an anti-spyware agent, antivirus agent, and a host IPS agent, and so on. It is a suite. But we know that it doesn't do enough because there are still more sophisticated attacks coming through. And when these attacks come through, they move laterally to look for your crown jewels. And once they find the crown jewels, they either exfiltrate it and use them for economic gains, or a quicker path maybe to just encrypt those data and then hold you out for a ransom. Now, the market has said, since we cannot prevent those attacks, let's go out and detect them fast and respond fast as well. And that has led to a brand new category of endpoint solutions known as the endpoint detection and response solution. I should say at this point, right, that when a solution comes out, in fact, it is already behind time, behind the attack. What do I mean by that? The security researcher has to look at the tactics that the hackers use, figure out a way to block it, come out with an idea, and develop that idea into a code, right? And the code then gets productized into a product, into a solution, and then they bring it out to sell to you. When they bring it out to sell to you, you consider it, you evaluate it, and you will have to go to your board to ask for budget. And after that, you run a project and issue an RFP. By the time you implement it, you are easily 1 to 2 years behind the initial attack. And all that happens while the attack is still evolving. Then earlier this year, over the last 12 months, we have seen a lot more different types of attack emerging. So hardware-based attack, for example, on a BIOS, in fact, in April this year, we saw that. And the supply chain attack has become quite commonplace together with the ransomware, right? The supply chain on attack on SolarWinds and later on Kaseya. So the vendor then comes along and says, well, maybe the EDR can't quite block it. If they are good, if the product was designed well from the start, they would have been able to block it with a new signature. If they are unable to block with a new signature, they may come out to you and say, upgrade the security engine. And if they can't, if even upgrading the engine is not good enough, they may modify the product completely. The market is now telling you, well, it's not the EDR you need, it's the XDR you need. Can you imagine going through this cycle of finding a new product for every new attack, right? But let's look at what XDR is, right? The XDR is an extension of the EDR, in fact, in that you're not just taking data from all of your endpoints, you're taking data from network or from the cloud instances that you have as well to try to triage the attack. Now, talking about data, right? Let's look at traditional data gathering, right? In the past, we used to take all the data and we pass it to a log server. And then on that log, your SOC team will look at, your SOC security analyst will look at the log files and try and triage and create rules, correlation rules that tell you when an attack is happening. We've always suffered from a problem that if you collect too much data, the path to insight is extremely slow because you have to process a lot of data. But if you don't collect enough data, you may miss the attack completely, and that defeats the purpose. So with EDR, what happened was that the vendor says, well, the traditional log perhaps is a bit too slow. Let's collect the data and go into a data lake that's stored in the cloud. And on the cloud, which has two advantages over on-prem, right? It has elasticity and it has scalability. I can collect a lot of data and still be elastic to pump in the resources that I need to make sure that the insight comes out fast. And I can use AI and machine learning to try and make that better. But that has evolved, right? Think about it. The attack has, the EDR has not managed to catch a lot of the attacks. And now the vendor is telling you, well, I will also collect data from the network and I will also collect data from the cloud. I'll call it XDR. And heck, why not? I'll also collect data from third-party products, not just my own products. So guess what? You're back to square one, where in the past, your SOC tried to collect all of those data. Now it is the vendor, your XDR vendor, who's telling you, I will collect all the data and I'll store it in the cloud. So my question to you probably is, how comfortable are you with passing all of this power over to a service provider who will store all of your data in the cloud to try to get to an insight on the security incident, to try to be fast about it? Talking about that, right? Let's take a step back and look at cybersecurity capabilities. And I think to start with, almost every solution out there will tell you, you need to have visibility. You can't protect what you can't see. And one of the issues with protecting endpoint has always been that you do not know how many endpoints you have even. You need to know, you need to be able to discover all of your assets. And having discovered them, then you will know what are the hardware assets, what are the software assets, what operating systems you have, and how to protect them. And to start with that protection, you will impose cyber hygiene on it. So by cyber hygiene, we're talking about setting baselines, hardening the OS, finding the vulnerabilities, patching them, and so on. This is an extremely important part of cybersecurity because we all know that 80% of cyber breaches are caused by a lack of cyber hygiene, whether the firewall was misconfigured or the endpoint was not hardened correctly. In the Colonial Pipeline ransomware incident this year, for example, we know that it occurred because of a leaked password on an account that was old, no longer in use. But despite not being in use, it was never decommissioned. And that's a hygiene question that we are asking. Once you can get hygiene, you ask yourself, how can I put up the barriers, the multi-layer defense to block as much as I can block? And traditionally, our problem here has been that we needed to buy one product to block a new attack, buy another product to block another new attack. And the products don't talk to each other, and therefore you get very siloed view. So there's no coherent way to prevent an attack, despite having invested a lot of money in cyber defense. And of course, we mentioned it just now, where you can't block the attack, you need to be able to discover them fast. And once you discover, you need to be able to respond fast. So the important thing here is to be able to validate the attack and to figure out what the attacker is doing. So I give you an example in a real life, right? When you walk to a doctor and you say, hey, doctor, I got a fever, the doctor won't just treat you on the spot, right? They will ask some more questions. And the question could relate to, for example, what did you eat yesterday? And that's to try and rule out food poisoning. Or they could ask you things like, where have you been, to try and rule out the fact you've been to the jungle and bitten by some animal that caused the fever. So there's a need in cyber response equivalently for us to be able to ask questions to really figure out what's going on, validate the attack, and then you can contain it correctly, eradicate it, and investigate. And after that, you got to understand the attack fully so that you can adjust your security posture so that future attacks will not be effective against you. So to try to get to those cybersecurity capabilities, what is required? I think what is required is the ability to ask a question of your enterprise. Think about it. You can today go to Google, ask a question out into the broad World Wide Web, and the answer comes back to you in seconds, why can't you do the same thing for your enterprise? If I ask you how many versions of Firefox do you have in your environment, shouldn't you know about it? Shouldn't you know within seconds? So this relates back now to the topic of my speech today, which is the need for speed. There's a need for you to be able to ask any question and to know within seconds what's going on. And once you know, you are able to take action. And the action could be to just kill the process, quarantine the endpoint, kill the network connection, change a registry setting so that you harden the OS and so on. And by doing that, you're in a much better shape, right? Let's look back at the scenario that I painted just now. For all of the new hardware attacks or the new supply chain attack or the next new attack that's coming out, if you're able to ask and know and act, ask any question, you have the asset visibility, you know the device posture. If you know the device posture and you can act to kill it, to change the posture, right, so that you can kill the attack, then you are in a much better shape to deal with the next unknown attack. And for all the known attacks, frankly, that part of the equation is already very, very commoditized. Almost every vendor will give you identical type of protection. The profile is very identical. The question is manageability. So the native OS protection is, in fact, a pretty good place to start already. As far and with respect to the data collection, if you're able to ask, know, and act, and you are able to work with real-time data, then your equation changed very much here, in that instead of pulling data into a data lake or into a log where you need massive amounts of data, you could potentially store the data on an endpoint. And what that means is that when you ask, you actually get fresh data. You don't get outdated data. And when I say outdated, it could be 1 day old, but it's still outdated because in that 1 day, the baseline could have changed, the system could have been patched, a new vulnerability could have emerged. So the data that is 1 day old is in fact too old. With instantaneous data, you get heightened situational awareness. And since you can query that data and get answers within seconds, you could in fact store a recording of the data on the endpoint itself. And when we talk about recording, right, in fact, we know that for about 1 gig worth of data, you're able to record things like, what processes were running, what network connectivity was done, and so on for every single endpoint. 1 gig on a per month basis gives you 1 month's view. What that means is that 12 gig on every endpoint will give you 12 months view, enough for you to go after long-lived attacks. And that puts you in a very good shape to automate a lot of the menial tasks. You know, as a fact, there's certainty on the data that you bring back, that you can trust it for heightened situational awareness. You can automate it with SOAR to take action. And it supports as well threat hunting and incident response on a very rapid fashion. Does this apply to working from home? Yes, it does. What you do need, of course, is a single console that can scale to your enterprise. And when I talk about scaling, we are talking about a single console being able to manage all 1,000 of your endpoints or 10,000 or 100,000 as the case might be. And that management console needs to be a centralized infrastructure because that will give you a single pane of glass. In that single pane of glass, you want to have secure communication to all endpoints, regardless of your VPN. So you can't be relying on a VPN. You need to have that management capability to see all endpoints in a secure fashion, whether because the management console has a PKI infrastructure and to protect that communication. So that gives you a single source of truth and allows you to act with velocity and scale. When that endpoint 9 comes back into your corporate environment, you want to be able to identify the user as well as the posture of the device that's coming in. That's important. And people talk about zero trust. This is the foundation of zero trust. Verify the user, verify the device, make sure that they are in good shape, and then allow them access into your intranet. So in short, right, the ability to ask, know, and act puts you in a very good shape to take care of all of these tasks surrounding it. You can discover all new assets that joining your network at a very high speed. Have a good inventory of what you have so that you can protect them. Implement baseline compliance, vulnerability management, and patch management for cyber hygiene. be able to go after cyber defense, detect IOC fast, do threat hunting and incident response on an extremely fast basis. So coming back to the cybersecurity capabilities, the ability to ask, know, and act gives you full visibility of all assets, gives you very high confidence on cyber hygiene, and a superior cyber defense capability powered by the ability to detect the IOCs, and then gives you an extremely fast and scalable cyber response as well, powered by speed, scalability, and agility. From a business perspective, this allows you to make decisions based on real-time visibility, not based on old data, remember, not one day old, it is real-time visibility. Take complete control of the situation and then be able to respond with velocity and scale, being able to trust the data that you get. Thanks very much again for joining my session. My name is Alvin. Please feel free to connect with me on this QR code.